I often discuss objective reality on this channel. Objective reality can mean a number of different things. Mostly when I talk to people about it, the first problem I run into is that we define objective reality differently, or we're talking about our own personal ideas, and the idea of how it's defined is really secondary. And then we're arguing really over the definition indirectly. So the first thing I'm going to do is give an overall definition of objective reality. Another thing I wanted to say just before I give the definition is objective reality is interesting in that you can define it from an individual perspective. For instance, you could talk about objective reality as being everything outside of what's considered subjective, basically. But then that subjectivity can be fastened to an individual, my subjectivity. So everything that's objective to me as an individual ends where my subjectivity ends. And so when I'm surrounded by people, those are subjective essences out there, and I believe they exist independently of me. They're part of my objective reality because I don't really control them. There may be some intellectual component that we share, but some part of what they are exists as my objective reality because it ends, my subjectivity ends at some point and those people's lives begin. So I often talk to people about objectivity of the individual, and are we talking about individuals' perspective of objectivity? But then there's another perspective of objectivity which would be a priori for all life, right? If a lot of people get into perception and consciousness, well, are we talking about the perception of all life? Like, does a bug's observation bring reality into existence, collapse the particle into our reality, our universe? Objectivity can be defined from the individual perspective. It can be defined from all life's perspective of perception. It can be defined as just what we think of physical reality. We're going to talk about all those things, so let's first define objective reality. Objective reality refers to the existence of the world and its properties independent of human perception, beliefs, or interpretations. It's the idea that things exist and have specific attributes, whether or not anyone observes or thinks about them. Key aspects of objective reality: mind independent, exists regardless of our human perception or consciousness. Universal consistency, the same for all observers under the same conditions. So the laws of physics are the same, so we're all going to perceive the laws of physics as the same. It has an empirical basis. It can be investigated through scientific methods and empirical evidence. It contrasts with subjectivity. There's a back and forth with subjectivity. Some subjects, are partially objective and some subjective, like the human form. There's a certain part of our object existence that is, just like a rock, okay? It's just a hard existence that passes through time, while our subjective existence is much more changeable and riding on the cruise ship of the hard object, really. Objective reality is different from personal experiences, interpretations, or opinions. Philosophical perspectives on objective reality. Realism. Objective reality exists independently of our minds. The moon is there if no one looks at it. Idealism. Reality is shaped by consciousness of mental constructs. Its reality might not exist without minds to perceive it. Scientific realism. The physical world, including unobservable entities like atoms, exists objectively and can be known through science. Phenomenalism. We can only access reality through sensory experiences, making objective reality unknowable directly. I think phenomenalism is basically the most damaging aspect, and it leads people into sort of like this fantasy la land. I'm not saying that reality isn't rendered like a video game when it's observed, but there is the blind man argument, and there's plenty of evidence out there that there's continuity that happens. So whether it comes into existence after it's observed, or whether it, or it stays existent, the point is the continuity is still there, so it becomes a moot point. Modern challenges to objective reality, quantum mechanics. Some interpretations suggest that reality is observer dependent at the microscopic level. Simulation hypothesis. Simulation hypothesis questions whether what we perceive as reality is actually a constructed simulation. Postmodernism and constructivism. What we call reality is influenced by language, culture, and social structures. I mean, that's not wrong. It's just, it's not everything, so you have to address all of it. I'm going to go over a few scientific verification methods because this discussion, it sort of goes off into that area where you talk about how to verify. To me, pattern recognition alone is enough to verify that there's an external reality that exists a priori before the experience of life. People can't even agree on the definition of objective reality before they jump into arguments about how their view is correct. For the record, I think we're working with limited information, but I don't think it's relative, and I don't think we live in a dreamland where everybody's reality is somehow different from everybody else's. Let's talk about verificationism, falsifiability, and move to modern day ideas that advance the capturing of truth through scientific method. We need to talk more about objective reality at the end too. Verificationism, the statement or hypothesis is meaningful only if it can be empirically verified. Metaphysical, ethical, and religious statements are often dismissed as meaningless since they cannot be tested empirically. It's criticized for being self-defeating. The principle itself cannot be empirically verified. So it's self-referential, or it's self-evident, which I think is kind of, in a way, just sophistry. Falsifiability. Falsifiability, introduced by Karl Popper, argues that a theory is scientific if and only if it's capable of being proven false by empirical evidence. Instead of looking for verification, science should aim to test and potentially falsify the hypotheses. A hypothesis is scientific if there exists some conceivable test that could show it to be false. Science advances by discarding falsified theories rather than verifying absolute truths. It distinguishes science from pseudoscience. Astrology is unfalsifiable because it can explain any outcome. And I've met with people and talked to people who actually think like this, and they come from the ideological approach, which you'll see further down in the video when we discuss that. But anything you say, they have some generalized argument which can't be proven true or false, and they're so confident about it. It's like, why are you so confident? You're arguing that I can't prove anything from a point in which you can't prove anything, but you're so confident. It's just weird. They're so confident that things can't be known or measured, and yet they're confident from a perspective of things that can't be known. If you're saying that things can't be known or measured, or that science failed you somehow, what is it that you're so confident about? Today, most philosophers of science agree that a variety of factors, including empirical evidence, logical coherence, and explanatory power, should be considered when evaluating scientific claims. Let's talk about a couple of those theories as they give a better, stronger contextual foundation to what's actually going on, instead of sort of forcing this reduction into these ideas that are meant to be strictly this or strictly that. Really, I mean, we need groups of ideas that work together to gain the actual truth, because reality is complex. Paradigm shifts. Karl Popper's falsifiability principle states that science progresses by rejecting false theories. If an experiment contradicts a hypothesis, the theory should be discarded and replaced with a better one. Kuhn showed that scientists often ignore falsifying evidence during normal science until a crisis forces a new paradigm. So this happens to all of us, right? It's sort of like a heap paradox. If I have 99% of my hypothesis is correct, but I find anomalies here and there, how many anomalies does it take to finally go over the line and say, okay, this needs to move to a new theory? Because how do you even set a baseline for that? I'm guessing the most basic baseline is functionality. But if you're looking at something that doesn't have a direct functional consequential measurement, then you're gonna appeal to this being an exception to the rule, and that's the right thing to do in my mind, because so many people look for one exception and then they discount the whole thing. It's an all or nothing approach. But when is life ever all or nothing? And the functional things that we've gotten by playing what we can know into a layered, compiled knowledge base, right? We use the things that we can know, and that's how all of technology has developed, right? Falsifiability is too simplistic. Scientists don't instantly reject theories when faced with anomalies. Instead, paradigms persist until a new framework emerges. Science should aim to describe and predict observable phenomena accurately rather than seek ultimate verification or complete falsification of theories. So regarding objective reality, the question boils down to whether observation or consciousness is necessary for reality to collapse into a definite state, or whether other physical interactions force reality into its particle-like existence. Here are the main perspectives. The Copenhagen interpretation. Reality collapses upon observation according to the Copenhagen interpretation. A quantum system exists in a superposition of all possible states until it is measured. So right here, I think we need to separate the definition of measured and observed, because I think ultimately in the end, observation is a form of measurement, and when particles are brought into reality or they are collapsed to their particle form by reality itself, that's a measurement. So observation is just one form of measurement that collapses particles into our current reality, okay? So I think we need to focus on the definitions between measurement and observation being a form of measurement. The act of observation collapses the wave function, forcing the system to take on a definite state. The interpretation raises deep questions. Does this mean consciousness plays a fundamental role in reality? I always say the same thing. So blind people don't have physical reality, they're just floating around in space. I mean, common sense tells you that it's not just observation. So decoherence theory. This is the one, I'm a decoherentist, okay? This is me. This is the most sensible theory. Reality is forced into definite states by interactions. A quantum system doesn't require a conscious observer to collapse. Instead, interaction with the environment, air, molecules, light, and other particles forces the wave function to take on a definite state. This would be in line with the notion of an objective reality, which seems to be in line with common sense, okay? So I think philosophers, you're making us look bad. You know, people that just don't take this point of view, you're making the rest of us look bad. So we should be looking at measurement rather than observation in general for decoherence theory. If an electron is left alone in a vacuum, it can exist in superposition. But the moment it interacts with another particle, its wave function effectively collapses. So it becomes part of our reality. And it melds in with our objective reality, taking its place in, contingency. What's the implication of decoherence theory? Reality's not waiting for a conscious observer. It's shaped by physical processes and interactions. The many worlds interpretation. No collapse at all. The many worlds interpretation takes things even further. Instead of a wave function collapsing, every possible outcome of a quantum event actually happens in separate branches of reality. This means that in one universe, you observe a particle behaving one way, while in another universe, it behaves differently. Reality doesn't collapse, it just splits into multiple versions. The implication is there's no need for observation or collapse. All possibilities coexist in an ever-branching universe. Objective reality. Is there a classical world beneath quantum mechanics? Some physicists and philosophers argue for objective reality independent of observation, but modified by quantum laws. Pilot wave theory. Reality consists of real particles guided by an underlying pilot wave, meaning the particle is always in one place, but its behavior is still wave-like. Spontaneous collapse theories. Instead of observation forcing a collapse, wave functions naturally collapse over time due to internal quantum effects. The implication of that is even if we don't observe the universe, it would still exist, but quantum mechanics shapes its structure in ways we don't fully understand. So what forces reality into existence? It depends on which interpretation you lean toward. If you accept Copenhagen, then reality needs an observer to collapse. If you accept decoherence, then reality collapses through physical interactions, not necessarily consciousness. If you accept many worlds, then reality never collapses. Everything just happens, just in different branches of the universe. If you accept pilot wave or objective collapse, then reality exists independently, but quantum mechanics affects its structure. So the big question is consciousness special in this process, or is reality self-sustaining through physical laws alone? So like I said before, I'm a decoherence theorist. It's not just observation that collapses particles from a wave to its determined place in reality. But this sort of reinforces the idea that we're all living in a simulation in some way. Just like in video games, to save processing power, only the area that the player currently is rendered. I can't help but think that this change from wave to particle is somehow an energy-saving mechanism. One argument I always put to people who follow the Copenhagen interpretation is, so blind people don't have a reality to exist in? It's just basic common sense that tells us there's something perpetuating reality that's not mind dependent. I do consider the idea that it's possible that consciousness, or I think what's better described as awareness, may be determined all the way down to the particle level. I consider the possibility that objective reality exists, that being a reality that exists a priori of human perception because of a necessary essence. Not necessarily a being, more like a universal awareness or a program. So basically our objective reality could be a life form in itself that we emerged from, but it's not contingent upon us. When we disappear, that essence will still be there. If it were true, this would be enough to confirm objective reality to me. Yeah, there's a larger being, and that's why we see this thing that works in consistent ways, because it's much larger than us, and its contingencies spread out over a longer period of time. And so to us, that appears as a physical reality. At the particle level, it becomes a deterministic rule set. If you like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.